Hello! Today will not be a long video. For the most part, we're kind of up to date on where we should be, surprisingly, but usually I would do a little bit more about globalization, but I think we're okay on that for now. So when we left off, I was completing this chapter. I was in chapter 2, and I was on page 18. So I'll review a couple of things that I was talking about before. Dumping. Okay, so dumping is on page 18. Dumping it can be done for various reasons. Some are not so bad, such as clearing inventory that might go out of stock soon. It's not expired yet, so it's still a good product that can be used. However, there's too much inventory in one country or in one place, and they need to sell it, so they move it to another country to sell it. That's okay. That's the better case scenario. Another scenario that's not so good is dumping that is done with products that are not actually healthy and have been banned in one country. And then they get sent to Vietnam or another country, and consumers and customers don't recognize that the products are unhealthy or dangerous. And that is terribly unethical, right? We also get some products that companies, they will use dumping as a technique to gain market share. Sometimes a company will put a bunch of cheap products in one market to try to flood the market and kill competition. So there's another reason why some companies dump. So the main three reasons are to get rid of unsold inventory that's still good, to get rid of products that are illegal in another country or have been banned, or 3, to eliminate competition and gain market share. So the first one is not unethical. The second two, you could argue that they are actually unethical. Fair trade, I described yesterday, mostly has to do with producers of agricultural products and cutting out the middlemen, middle people in the transaction, and having direct transactions between the buyer and the seller, and therefore there's less money lost in the transactions through the distributors, and the farmers get more money and hopefully get some help and expertise from the company so they can better serve their customers, right? So if the farmer doesn't know the customer, it's hard for them to know how much and which kind of beans to produce if we talk about coffee. In this way, the customer can make a direct request from the farmer, and the farmer can produce the kind of beans that the customer wants and get paid more for it and have less waste. So it should be a good thing for everyone. Okay, now moving on to the bottom of the page where it says other ethical dilemmas. Talk about a few different ethical dilemmas. Globalization creates another dimension for ethical questions and business decisions. And as we said before, the biggest reason for that is because it's much harder to regulate business internationally. It also provides an opportunity for Australian businesses to take a positive stance on issues of ethical behavior, social responsibility, working conditions, and environmental protection around the world. So that's a good list. Managing across borders includes difficult ethical dilemmas. Again, the word dilemma means choices that you make where neither one is perfect, right? So an ethical dilemma for a company in most cases adds up to I'm going to lose profit, or it's going to increase my costs versus doing the right thing. So that's an ethical dilemma. The dilemma is between doing what's best for the company and its profit and doing what's best for the community, both locally and globally. So they're giving an example on page number 19. The example is Nestle Company. We all know Nestle from their coffee products, Nescafe in particular. For example, Nestle uses something called GM, or genetically modified ingredients in its food products. It has been accused also of dumping products that were ejected in Europe under its genetic modified laws, GM laws, and dumping them into developing Asian countries where the laws on GM products were either absent or less stringent. Stringent means less strong, weaker. So what does that mean? That means that, so GM, genetically modified foods, are agricultural products where the DNA has been altered by scientists in order to prolong their lifespan or to make bigger watermelons or something. And so there are some questions about whether GM products are safe, but there's never been any study that showed that they're really unsafe yet. So it's just a controversy that some countries don't like the idea of, unnatural items. Now, I'm not for Nestle in any form or fashion. I think Nestle is kind of a bad company, but in this case, I think they need to announce it. I mean, they should tell the countries that they're using GM foods, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's dangerous or unsafe for customers. Another thing that Nestle does, which is particularly bad, is they create situations where they try to take over water sources in many countries so they can sell more bottled water. And they make a lot of money off water. Nestle, for example, they launched bottled water in countries such as Pakistan and India that do not have widespread supplies of clean drinking water already. So Nestle sold the safe clean water, but it priced it so high that it was unaffordable for low-income groups. So in this case, something that we need to survive was turned into a luxury item. So in the future, of course, water is going to become harder and harder to manage. So some companies are seeing the water market as something they're trying to capture, like some countries are trying to capture the oil market. So we should be careful about, there's ethics involved with that. Okay, so the next thing, I'm going to show you a short video now. This is just an overview, just so you can get the vocabulary and kind of just feel some information about the topics. This is about bribery, okay? Bribery and corruption. Bribery, we know it because we experience it in our daily life, is when you pay money, let's say tea money or under the table money to someone as outside of the normal transactions, outside of taxation. It's a bribe. It's a bribe. We'll talk about it. So first video.
It's estimated by the UN that the scale of money laundering is equivalent to between 2 to 5% of global GDP. Nick Thatcher went to find out more about the global nature of financial crime and what's being done to address it.
The problem of corruption is present in all nations, rich and poor, north and south, developed and developing. And in the words of the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, it robs societies as schools, hospitals and other vital services of much needed funds. Public officials can often enrich themselves or turn a blind eye to criminality, whilst also depriving people of their rights, driving away foreign investment and despoiling the economy.
Financial institutions have a number of responsibilities in the context of corruption. It involves understanding the threat, understanding the nature of corruption, then risk assessing that to see how it interacts with their own customers, their own products and services. And having understood that, developing controls that mitigate it.
The annual costs of international corruption amount to a sky-high $3.6 trillion in the form of bribes and stolen money, much of which flows around the world via the global financial system, as those responsible look to disguise its criminal origins. Another survey showed that 25% of people worldwide said they had had to pay a bribe simply to access public services. It's often the poorest communities and countries which pay the highest price for these ill-gotten gains. And over the years, organisations have been set up to fight back.
In 1993, a few individuals came together to take a stance against corruption and created Transparency International. Now based in more than 100 countries, the movement works relentlessly to stir the world's collective conscience and to bring about change.
The UK national chapter of Transparency International is here in London.
I want to talk to you about the Russian laundromat.
And Robert Barrington is its executive director. He told me no country can afford to ignore the scale of the problem.
I think it's too early to say it's a losing battle, but you certainly can't say that we're winning it at the moment. This needs to be tackled at a global scale. Individual firms need really to be doing their bit, because once you've got a chink in the armour, people often say that laundered money is like water, it flows through the cracks. And as soon as you've got cracks, that's where it will flow. So all of those institutions that are the frontline defences need to be robust in those defences. Without that, we will lose the battle.
Another non-governmental organisation is Global Witness. Its work to uncover the truth about the sale of so-called blood diamonds to fuel the civil war in Angola in the 90s helped earn it a reputation for challenging corruption across the world. Campaigner Nika Polstra told me that today new technology may help people to hide their money, but the emergence of big data has made it easier to detect it.
That data is available either because it's leaked, but also as governments make important data sets increasingly available to the public. And that's where we are playing a role to use technology and things like algorithms and cloud computing to analyze companies, procurement information, property ownership, and a number of other important data sets to reveal suspicious activity and corruption.
The International Compliance Association is also committed to supporting its members and the wider compliance community, and provides training and education that helps professionals recognise and prevent financial crimes such as bribery and corruption.
The ICA offers training from certificate to postgraduate diploma level. So for instance, around how do we assess and evaluate risk? How do we manage that risk? How do we build a control framework? Customer due diligence, transaction monitoring, investigation. These are some of the areas that are included within our training that will enable organisations to meet the challenge of countering the threat of corruption.
Whilst corruption still takes place and bribery is seen simply as a way of doing business in some parts of the world, international initiatives, cooperation, and the highlighting of the human costs are providing a ray of light, a hope that real changes can be made.
What is a bribe? Bribery can be anything of value. Any sum of money or a gift offered to an official could amount to a bribe if its intention or effect is to cause undue influence. It doesn't have to be large sums of money or an expensive car, and there doesn't actually have to be a transfer of funds to be considered a bribe. Under international conventions, even the promise or offer of a gift constitutes bribery. Now, one of the most common areas of bribery comes in the form of business gifts and hospitality. You need to be especially careful when you give or receive them. A gift is something that is given to another person to give pleasure or show gratitude. An example of a business gift may be a memento or item exchanged between two parties as a gesture of goodwill or thanks. Hospitality is the kind of generous treatment offered to guests. Gifts should be of nominal value, clearly related to business, and should be offered in the normal course of doing business. Be sure to consult your company's policies before offering any gift to a government official. It is your responsibility to know the law. Educate yourself on your company's policies and laws before the situation arises, because ignorance is no excuse. Remember to always consider the intention of the gift. Any gift given or received in the proper course of doing business should have nominal value or should be promotional in nature. Acceptable gifts in hospitality include meals in the course of business, items of nominal value, gifts during holidays or special occasions, moderate gifts or gift cards that are tied to specific business events or occasions, and mementos for participating in an activity or conference. Cash or currency is never acceptable for any reason. Also, intercity or international travel paid for by a supplier, vendor, contractor, or anyone outside the company should be avoided. And gifts received during a purchase decision, and gifts that are exclusive only to you under terms not available to anyone else should not be accepted.
Okay, so this is a broad topic, right? Corruption. Corruption is the use of money to get influence or to give influence to someone else. So, of course, there's a huge danger in having a corrupt system where everybody has to pay government officials just to do anything, to achieve anything. But in some cases, I think there's two classes. We should talk about two classes of bribes. There are the bribes that are given that are almost like gifts, like this example here, and it's like you do that to get something done, just to achieve a basic outcome. I think we've all dealt with police here. Police, they take bribes from you. Some people are very insulted by that, but in some places it's part of the culture to pay that money. Sometimes the same thing happens to you when you have to go to customs and to get goods out of customs. Sometimes the same thing happens when you go and you need some paperwork finished. I've seen my wife give extra money to the police just for them to do their job, to sign a form. That's something that I need to stay in Vietnam. So when she does it, she doesn't feel like she's being ripped off. She feels like, well, she wants to thank them for their service somehow. And this is a kind of bribery, but it's not the real kind of bribery that the international laws about bribes are shooting for. Of course, we would like it if the police officers or the government officials all got paid enough salary that they didn't feel like they needed to make money from the people who needed to use their services. That would be an ideal situation. However, in many countries, that's not what happens. And if you look at it a different way, everyone can pay that money, okay? It's like a tax. Everyone can pay the money, and if everyone pays whatever small money that is, and they get their goods out of customs or they get their paperwork done or whatever, it becomes the cost of doing business. So it's available to everyone, so it's not discriminatory. Yes, it's an extra cost. Yes, it's a hassle. Yes, you have to guess how much to give. And that's not really fun. But that's not stopping someone from doing business. The real kind of bribery that is the one that's most illegal, or the one that is the most dangerous for business, is the one where you can pay lots of money, not to every official, but you have one gatekeeper, one government official, one important person who you or one company will pay in order to limit competition in the market. So that makes unfair competition. So when you pay the police officer an extra $100,000, when you pay the customs agent an extra $100,000 or $200,000 to get your goods, everyone can do that. So it's not really an unfair advantage, it's part of the system. When one company can pay a government official to block another company who might want to bid for a contract. So let's say there's a construction company who wants to, there are two construction companies that want to work on a subway project in Saigon. And of course, I'm not saying that there was bribes involved with that, but let's say there are two companies. There's a Japanese company and a Taiwanese company. Both of them can build the subway. Both of them have given their estimate of the cost. And one company pays a huge amount of money to some government officials, and those government officials give the contract to the Japanese company. That's the kind of bribery and corruption that's really bending the system and creating competition problems. So the Taiwan company had no chance in the end. It wasn't a question of whether or not they were the best or the most cost-effective or had the best construction record. It was just about who paid the money under the table and how much did they pay. So that's the kind of bribery that they talk about. So in the book, page 19, another example is bribes. Corrupt politicians and government officials may request amounts of money in order for an Australian business to operate in their country. Do we see bribes as a necessary cost of business, or do we take a stand against corruption? Some of these are, so we can think about which ones are worse than others from these cases. Reasons why businesses pay bribes. Some might be that competitors are also giving bribes to obtain business in that country. So when bribes affect competition, that's particularly bad. This is an accepted practice in the country. Again, is it available to everyone, or is it gaining a specific advantage? The tax laws in the country encourage bribery by writing it off as a business expense. So in this case, this is a way to keep money away from the government. It's like tax minimization again. 4, the government has control over business activities. In other words, if you don't pay, you don't play. No bribe, no business. That may be true. That's also, that's kind of in between, right? That's kind of like if you have to, if there's no other option, it depends again on how much you want to enter that market. So, government officials are poorly paid and use bribery to supplement salaries. We all know that to be true, and in the small way, it's not really a big problem. Bureaucratic delays can be costly for business. So if you don't pay that government official, then you may get your product, but it may not come for 6 months or 4 months, so you're going to be delayed. So in the biggest cases are the ones that affect competition and limit your ability to do business completely in that country. But the ones that are done by small government officials that anyone can pay are corrupt, but not as, they don't really change the business environment. They add a little cost. So, that's bribes. Oh, they're giving an example here. One example involved the Australian government and the Australian Wheat Board. Wheat, the people who sell wheat. Well, Saddam Hussein used to be the president of the country of Iraq before the Americans went to Iraq and killed him in 2004. While Saddam Hussein was in power in Iraq, the United Nations imposed trade sanctions on the country. The aim of prohibiting trade with Iraq was to try to pressure the President Hussein to stop his invasion of Kuwait. He stopped it like 10 years before that. The Australian government, through the Australian Wheat Board, they paid bribes to Iraqi government to obtain wheat contracts to go around the sanctions. What a terrible example. Terrible, terrible. Just for information, we're going to talk about trade. Trade sanctions are when we hope the international community wants to penalize some country for some behavior that's starting a war, aggressive, doing something that the international community does not like. But usually now, it's just the United States who decides that they're going to make trade sanctions and not allow some countries to trade with other countries. Obviously, these countries need to survive, so a lot of times they end up doing black market activities, and that's basically what happened there. So the Iraqi people needed to eat wheat. So the Iraqis, they tried to get some way, they tried to find some way to get the wheat that they could use for bread. And so somebody paid a bribe somewhere so they could go around these trade sanctions. It's a terrible example, I would say. Okay, so last thing today, very quickly, I am just going to go here and just highlight how far we've gone. So hopefully you feel good about the factors that are driving global business development. Financial growth opportunities, obviously. So profit maximization. Profit maximization is what companies try to do. They try to make maximum profits. This is the opposite. They try to have minimum losses. Consumers are more interested in international products. For example, the World Trade Organization has expanded its, more countries are involved in the World Trade Organization, so there's more, countries are more able to have free trade agreements, and sanctions is what I just talked about. It's when the international community puts some penalties on a country for some bad behavior. Deregulation of the financial markets, not the labor markets, but the financial markets, means that capital can fly around from country to country, which makes it more available for projects and hopefully increases the opportunity for business to expand overseas. Impacts of globalization. Employment levels in developing countries. Employment levels should probably increase, but wages should increase. That's more important. Developed countries are in competition with labor from developing countries, so obviously they're in a bad position, and salaries should fall in developed countries, and unemployment should increase as jobs, especially manufacturing jobs, go to developed countries. Global spread of skills and technology. This is necessary for the standards of international business to be able to function, right? Everybody's got to use the same standards in whether it's Google documents or, unfortunately, I hate Google, but I have to use them because that's the standard that's being used for classrooms all over the world now, so I have to use it also. So the spread of skills and technology goes around the world because companies, and in order to do business with each other, they need to have a similar standard and formats to use. International cooperation, okay, this can be political cooperation, trade agreements, environmental protection agreements. We have ASEAN, A-S-E-A-N. They don't just do trade, they have other issues, security issues, environmental issues they deal with. Domestic market is affected in many ways by importing and exporting, and also currency becomes more important, the strength of your currency. Tax minimization, this is where ethics begins, the ethical issues of tax minimization. As we should know, taxes are important for governments in order to provide social services and infrastructure for countries. You need that money for education. You need that money for healthcare. You need that money for roads, constructions, army, everything that a country needs depends on their ability to collect taxes. So when companies use tax havens and transfer pricing to hide the money that they need or should be paying to governments, that's bad for society. That's an ethical problem. Homegrown developed products, obviously, well, in the last video I said there's benefits for the company and there's benefits for the country. So you should have those separated. Ethics and global business decisions, including environmental responsibility. The biggest issue in international business is how to regulate a company that's not in one country. So companies that expand to other countries often look for countries that have weak environmental laws compared to the home country. So that's an ethical problem, to take advantage of the ability to pollute other people's countries. So that means that the countries that are being used need to strengthen their environmental laws. However, there's a dilemma because there's pressure to get new companies. So if you're a developing country or you're a poor country, you want to bring business to your country. So if the business that comes to your country wants to take advantage of your weak environmental laws, do you stop them when they're going to bring jobs to your country? That's a dilemma, okay? So that's an example of a dilemma. Outsourcing doesn't have to be bad, but in many cases the outsourcing that's happening these days has to do with moving manufacturing jobs to developing countries that have cheaper labor that can be used by companies to, working conditions, poor working conditions. And so we can, if you're in a developed country, you might be hidden from the effects of the manufacturing that goes on. Some people saw the Walmart video. I think that was very clear how a working environment in China or Asia might look like compared to the customers who buy the products. And the use of offshore labor is similar to that. The other issues we dealt with already were dumping, fair trade, PR, public relations, outsourcing, and bribes. So you should also include the other elements of business ethics in your analysis, or be able to use them to answer test questions. That's it. That's all I really have for you today. I will be available for you online this weekend. Please put your questions, if you have task questions, in the latest post of the classroom so I can see them quickly and respond as fast as I can. Okay, so everybody have a great day, and we'll see you, I don't know, probably I'll record another video on Tuesday, but on Monday I'll put a mailbox that says ATBME on it for you to use for Monday up until Tuesday at lunchtime. You can submit your first task, okay? And that's it. And we're moving on to free trade next week. That's our next topic. All right, have a great weekend.